Have you heard of F.W. Borum? He was an inspiration to Billy Graham, and Billy Graham sought him out when he came to Australia for a series of meetings. This man lived from 1871 to 1959. He was one of 10 children. He was the last of aspirants for Spurgeon's College. He heard Dwight L. Moody preach. He went to New Zealand. He had 3 main pastorates: Dunedin, Hobart, Melbourne. He began to write editorials for the newspapers. He wrote 3,000 editorials for the Hobart Mercury newspaper, 3,000. But he wrote 46 books. And if you want to make friends, new friends of intelligent people, get some intelligent people to read some of the 46 books of F.W. Borum. Not a good name for a preacher, B-O-R-E-H-A-M, but he never bored. People all over the world listened to him. He travelled in his old age, country after country, preaching the gospel. He was a man of great courage. He had a leg that was prone to breakages, broke several times, one time when he was hundreds of miles from civilization. But he loved to walk, and he took the risk. But he loved people, and he loved books. He agreed with Spurgeon. He that doesn't read will never be read. He that doesn't quote will never be quoted. He who doesn't use other men's brains shows he has no brains of his own. Brains are like peaches, they're meant to be picked. So he was a great reader. Came to a bookshop in New Zealand once that had hundreds of biographies. He said to the bookseller, "What's the price for all of them all together?" And he bought the lot. He was a great reader, but he was a great Christian. He used to wear a flower in his buttonhole, but his very presence was a fragrance. He had the meekness of Christ as well as the courage of Christ. He loved people. He had a wonderful wife who supported him in all things. Suffered terribly from insomnia, too much mental work, but he was a blessing whenever he spoke, and they came in crowds. You know, Fanny Crosby, when she was going to take a meeting, there'd be a crowd at least a block long waiting to hear her. Well, it was that way with Borum. He took daily meetings at one time in Melbourne, and people would give up their lunch to come and hear him. I recommend to you the books of William Borum. And one more name I must mention before we close. The Prince of them all, C.H. Spurgeon. There's a 2-volume set, The Early Years and The Full Harvest. Get them and read them. This man has more influence on Christians today than any other Christian. The next one to him is John Stott. Spurgeon influenced millions. His sermons were translated into the language of many countries. They went to all the parliamentarians. They went to the students in colleges and universities. Spurgeon worked like a navvy, but a third of his life he was sick. Rheumatism, lumbago. He had all sorts of health problems, some of them inherited, some because he was working too hard. But he always had a sense of humour. When he was only a young boy, preaching to farmers, he took up a collection, sent his hat around, came back empty. So he looked heavenward. He said, "Thank you, Lord, that I got my hat back." He had a great sense of humour. He started an orphanage. He started a preacher's college, a colporteur centre. He had all sorts of institutions. He was working. He taught in Europe, in Scotland, in Wales, 10 meetings a week. And letters. He got 500 letters a week. Many of them thoughtless, vain, foolish letters. but he thought it was his duty to answer them. Imagine answering 500 letters a week. May I urge you to read the 2-volume set, or if you want something shorter, Under the Shadow of the Broad Brim by Richard Ellsworth Day, D-A-Y. He wrote a book called Bush Aglow on Moody. He wrote another book on Finney. He's written several books on great men whom God has used. So here's an abridgment of the life of Spurgeon. Spurgeon has said so many wonderful things. You'll do what I've done. Write them down in a diary so you don't forget them. Spurgeon said that all of life was a journey with Christ leading for the Christian. That it didn't matter what happened, ultimately good would come from it. As our days, so shall our strength be. So I invite you to read the Prince of Preachers. Get the little devotional book, evening by evening and morning by morning. That's the most well known. Then his set of books on the Psalms, the Treasury of David. But there's a tiny little book I especially recommend to you. It's called Christ's Glorious Achievements. You can get it for $1 or $2, very cheap. Christ's Glorious Achievements. It's some of sermons, the best sermons of Spurgeon, put in one book. I recommend you get Christ's Glorious Achievements, and then you'll never give up reading Spurgeon. And in reading Spurgeon, you'll come closer day by day to the one who loves you infinitely, and the one who died for you, the one who paid your debts, the one who's by your side, smiling upon you this very day. God bless you.